From inside the Baltimore Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it's the first ever live off-season Baltimore Banner baseball chat. I'm Paul Mancano, going to be joined by Andy Kostka in just a bit, but we're here to discuss everything that is relating to the Baltimore Orioles in the off-season. We've tried this once about 15 minutes ago. We failed. The audio was not working, and we were just two mute puppets up here, but we are going to do this again, Andy, because from what I understand, the audio is now working.
Well, hopefully it's working.
The first comment tells us it is.
First comment. Look at that. That's amazing. All the things we said before were terrific. Just have to bear with us and trust us on that one. And hopefully we repeat it in a way that sounds even better.
Yeah. Well, let's get right back into it. Mute but handsome. Thank you for that comment as well.
I appreciate that.
So let's start with reviewing this 2023 Baltimore Orioles season, Andy. You look at the 101 win Orioles that won the American League East. A lot of things went right for this team. They got a little bit lucky in the fact that teams like the Yankees and the Red Sox had down seasons, and the Tampa Bay Rays kind of crumbled in the second half. There's no guarantee that all those things go right again for the Orioles. And if you put the Orioles in another division, you might look at the rest of the teams and say the Orioles have the division locked up for the next 2 or 3 years. But the American League East, given how tough it is, it's hard to repeat success year in and year out.
Correct. I mean, it's the toughest division in baseball. And of course, it is kind of funny that all three playoff teams lost in their first round with the Rays, the Blue Jays, and the O's all losing out. So that hurt a little bit with maybe the stature of the division, just in terms of playoff, how well they did in October, but incredibly grueling division. Every team is going to go out and compete this offseason for signings. The Boston Red Sox and New York Yankees will not be okay with missing the playoffs, and they should reload. And so there's really no guarantees when it comes to the AL East. And the difficult thing then for the Orioles is how do you build on 2023? I mean, building on 101 wins is not an easy task. I mean,
no.
Considering trying to do better than that, is few teams in the history of baseball have done better than that. So really, you're going to try to replicate some things, and you're going to have to find new ways to do other things, because baseball can be volatile with the up and downs of players. I mean, you might not have a Ryan O'Hearn hit 300 practically the entire season before very late in the year fell just below that line. But great surprise in what he was able to do. You had some relievers pop up that were phenomenal. I mean, Danny Coulomb, you can't say enough good things about what he did this year. And Kyle Bradish took that next step as a potential number one starter. So those are things that went really well. You cannot always bank on that repeating in 2024. So the O's will have to go in and maybe supplement the roster a little bit. But again, they do have the top farm system in baseball, phenomenal prospects up and down. So you could supplement it that way if you want. And you figure that like a Colton Cowser or Heston Kjerstad, a little bit slow at the beginning of their major league careers, but maybe they take that next step as well.
And Mike Elias has a lot of key decisions to make, because we've seen this problem coming down the road for several years now, which is you have a little bit of a logjam at several positions between the guys that are established, that are already in the big leagues, and the prospects that are waiting to make their debuts or have made their debuts and are waiting for regular time. Yeah. We saw Jordan Westburg become a key contributor in the second half and got to play in the postseason. We saw Colton Cowser come up and struggle for the first couple weeks. Determining which of these prospects are going to be key contributors in the future is a difficult question to answer. Joey Ortiz made his big league debut this year. We've heard great things about his glove. Should Mike Elias trade him and try to get a starting pitcher back, a reliever back? Should Mike Elias trade somebody in front of him and try to clear room for Joey Ortiz? And it's the same case with Heston Kjerstad, with Connor Norby, with Kobe Mayo. There are a lot of interesting test cases where Elias may have to decide between, do we go into the future assuming that this prospect is going to be a good big leaguer, or do we try to capitalize on his high prospect status right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's I truly do not envy the situation, just because of how difficult that the answers are for these questions. But at the same time, I suppose it's better than not knowing who's going to play at what position with having no idea. This might be a little bit better having too many options.
Right.
Um, I think John Mioli just wrote a column on this for the Banner. The classic take every single offseason for the past 3 or 4 off seasons has been trade Anthony Santander. Um, that I don't, John pointed out in his column that how do you replace a guy that's switch hit power from both sides of the plate. Um, One of the best power hitting switch hitters in baseball,
Yeah.
not just in Baltimore. So um, that is a difficult thing to stomach, to consider getting rid of a guy like that. But you also have so many outfield prospects. So there's going to be questions asked on which ones do you keep. Santander is going to be expensive in arbitration. He has one final year of arbitration before he hits the open market, and then are you going to pay for him then? Those are the big questions. But the fact he's under team control, I imagine he stays, and he's such a big part of this team. But maybe that means you trade a Kyle Stowers,
Right.
somebody else. It's going to be very fascinating, and we will learn as everyone else learns. But we can just figure that something is going to have to give. I imagine you can't keep so many guys in AAA and win another AAA national championship.
You could try.
You could try, but it's going to be at a certain point. You're either going to have to call them up or you're going to have to move them. And this could be the year that you see a couple of those names get moved in favor of a starting pitcher or a big relief pitcher.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Yeah, and you wouldn't maybe be discussing this, the acquisition of another big reliever, had Felix Bautista not gone down. But there is an opening now at closer, and maybe they give that job to Yennier Cano. Maybe they go out and get a bona fide ninth inning guy.
Yeah, I mean, Danielle Allentuck, my beat partner on the O's, has mentioned that she could see, them going out and getting a 1 year of team control closer, via trade. That could be, definite path toward having some sort of, high leverage arm that's used to that situation. Yennier was a terrific surprise, terrific reliever this season. Really looked great in the 8th inning role.
Yeah.
Didn't have that many opportunities in the 9th, just with the way the games toward the last month of the season, there honestly weren't that many save opportunities. But when he did have those opportunities, a couple didn't go his way. Which is not to say, I mean, it happens to Felix, it happens to every great closer. Things don't go your way every single time. So not painting a broad brush, but I think there could be a little bit of a temptation to keep him in an 8th inning role and going out and get somebody else for the 9th inning, just for that 1 year before Felix comes back in 2025. And you'd hope he looks something like the Felix Bautista of 22 and 23.
And you saw a domino effect when Yennier Cano was in the closing role, because everybody else has to pitch in a slightly higher leverage situation.
Correct.
Behind him. And then you end up using somebody that you probably would prefer not to in a close game. And you saw the kind of effect that had. It was difficult timing wise too, because if Felix Bautista gets injured before the trade deadline, maybe the Orioles go out and they prioritize closer, or they prioritize adding to that bullpen.
Yeah.
Instead, they went and got Jack Flaherty, who is now a free agent. He will, I think you can say, almost definitely depart this team. Maybe the door is open to bring him back, but I think we saw not the best version of Jack Flaherty in Baltimore in the second half of the season.
Yeah, it was difficult for him. He never really found his footing pitch wise. He had a great debut against the Toronto Blue Jays, a team that he had pitched really well against with St. Louis before. So maybe there was a matchup there that, just really worked in his favor. But did not, I think he pitched only once in his 10, let's say 11. 11 starts, whatever it was. 9 starts. Okay, then 9 starts.
9 starts. I think 9 games, 7 starts.
Okay, well, whatever it was, he pitched into the 6th inning once, which is not the length that you require from a starting pitcher. He knows it. Everyone knows it. He wasn't making excuses for anything. He understood that it wasn't up to his standard what he had done previously in his career. moved into a bullpen role late in the year, but even then was used so sparingly.
Yeah.
Twice in the last like week and a half of the season, which was kind of surprising for a guy that could cover a lot of innings. And he did. I think game 2 it was of the ALDS covered quite
2 innings,
two, but maybe was underutilized a little bit, but maybe that's because they didn't necessarily trust his arm in a high leverage situation just based on what he had done previously in the year for Baltimore since the trade. So that trade didn't work out at the deadline. The trade for Shintaro Fujinami also did not really work out at the deadline. He didn't make the ALDS roster, which I think was a major surprise for me.
Yeah.
Surprise for a lot of people when you consider that Brian Baker, a guy that had pitched maybe once since August for your team, has been in AAA for most of the time. He was the guy instead that made the roster, and hindsight is 2020. But he had struggled as well, walked 3 guys, and eventually gave up. Jacob Webb gave up grand slam with 3 of the runs to Baker.
Yeah.
But difficult situations. But both trade deadline acquisitions didn't work out, and that is entirely possible.
Yeah.
You've seen it with the Texas Rangers. They added people in the offseason, and some of those guys got injured immediately and did not really have a huge impact. They went out and got other guys that did have huge impacts. So
even more.
Yeah. So it is just kind of the way baseball crumbles sometimes.
Well, I think that's a good transition to talk about what we've seen from this in this American League postseason in particular. We saw, the Texas Rangers go to 7 games with the Houston Astros and advance to the World Series. These were 2 teams that have excellent rotations. And you look at the Texas Rangers in particular, the number of swings that they took on starting pitchers. And like you said, not everyone worked out. They handed Jacob deGrom a massive contract. 1 year in, that does not look great. He did not pitch a single game for them this past year. But they didn't stop there. They handed Andrew Heaney a 1-year contract. They traded for Jordan Montgomery. They traded for Max Scherzer. They took as many bites of the apple in terms of starting pitchers as possible. And they ended up with a group that they can win 3 postseason games, maybe 4 in a row, because they have enough of those ace level, above average starting pitchers. But it took a lot to get there. And so for the Orioles, they didn't take too many swings last year. They signed Kyle Gibson to a 1-year, $10 million contract. They traded for Cole Irvin and traded the prospect Darryl Hernandez. They took really 2 swings on starting pitchers.
Michael Givens they added as a reliever.
Exactly, yeah.
It didn't work out as well. But
so, yeah,
you can't have too much pitching.
Right. I think that's what you learn from this.
That is what you learn from this, because obviously you can look at the Texas Rangers lineup, and it was definitely truly powerful, and there's guys up and down it. Start with Corey Seager, look at Adolis Garcia, really talented hitters throughout it. But when you look at what the rotation did, they covered for a bullpen that has been shaky the entire year for Texas. It has not been a good bullpen, but they managed because they got Jordan Montgomery, at the trade deadline, as a guy that could come in and do phenomenally well in October. They signed Nathan Eovaldi, who has done phenomenally well in October. Yeah. You think about last night in Game 7, they have, Max Scherzer 3 innings or so, whatever that number was, and then you have Jordan Montgomery come in after him on short rest and give another couple. That bypasses some of your weaker bullpen arms, and that's the way that October baseball can be. If you, but I mean, I think you mentioned on the previous recording of this before we discovered you guys couldn't hear us. The 2019 Nationals. Think about what some of the starting pitchers did out of the bullpen in that series.
Yeah,
was that helped them win a World Series, because you can throw convention out the window, because when it hits playoff baseball, starting pitchers can go into different roles, and you really need the best arms in the best spots, and you can kind of minimize how many relievers you use.
Yeah, we are live on YouTube, and so we can take comments as well, and we are seeing one about how much do you guys feel factor in guys' comfort level, camaraderie, loyalty to their buddies that they came up with. I do think that matters. I think it's always hard to put a specific value on that. I think we saw that be a factor for this Orioles team in the regular season. We saw guys come up and immediately feel comfortable. I think of Jordan Westberg, who played in the minors with so many of these guys. He overlapped with the likes of Heston Kjerstad and Adley Rutschman and Kyle Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez. So for them to come up together and immediately, feel comfortable in the clubhouse, I think that in particular helps a rookie, feel like they're not swimming in the deep end, and they, are surrounded by all these veterans who are expecting them to succeed right away. But you're also seeing it in the playoffs. The Texas Rangers have a couple rookies who are being thrown into a clubhouse where it's a lot of new guys. It's Nathan Eovaldi, who hasn't been there before. It's Jordan Montgomery, who hasn't been there very long, and Max Scherzer, who's been there a couple months. And they're finding their footing pretty quickly. So I do think that it is a factor, and it's definitely great that Brandon Hyde has built this incredible clubhouse culture, and I think he should win a Hale Manager of the Year, not just because of the wins on the field, but also the clubhouse culture that he built. However, the best players win the most games. And, if the Orioles were to make a trade where they send out some of these top prospects and get back a veteran, I don't think if the guy that they get who comes in and is productive and successful, I don't think that necessarily breaks any kind of clubhouse culture. So I think you do have to continue to build that and continue to give guys confidence and make them feel comfortable. However, I think the best players out there are going to win the most games. So you can't worry about that to too much extent.
Yeah, I think the clubhouse culture in Baltimore was absolutely kind of uniquely positive. It was definitely a great group of guys. Mike Elias, very much to his credit, has gone out and gotten veterans who really understand how to make a clubhouse culture work. Think of Jordan Lyles. Kyle Gibson was phenomenal for that.
James McCann,
thank you. Adam Frazier. Those are Rougned Odor last year was the heartbeat of that clubhouse a lot of the times. So those are veteran players that have an understanding of kind of how to make this fun at the same time as competitive and challenge. You have to push your teammates at the same time, but you have to have fun while doing it. But if you think to the Astros at the same time, there were plenty of rumors all year about clubhouse dissension and not necessarily being the easiest workplace environment for a lot of these guys, and it still got them to the ALCS.
Didn't matter.
Phenomenal players. They know how to step up when the time comes, and of course it didn't work at the end, but only 4 teams get to the championship series, and they were one of the 4 teams. So I think there is definitely a case for good players know what it takes, even if it's not the happiest, let's all get in a circle and sing a song together. That's what Baltimore was. And it made for a phenomenal regular season. It made for a lot of fun for us to cover. And I'm sure a lot of fun for fans to watch and follow along. But it's not mutually exclusive that you have to have a phenomenal clubhouse atmosphere to be successful in the postseason.
Yeah,
but it's definitely helpful.
Yeah, and I saw a comment as well about the Mets and the Padres, teams that are built with great players, but ultimately they struggled, and maybe you could point to culture, maybe you could point to lack of accountability. I know we've seen some reports about that, but I do think the Orioles have a great foundation in place. Adley Rutschman is the Captain America that he was billed to be. He is the clubhouse leader, now entering his 3rd season. You already have these guys in place. Gunnar Henderson appears to be, already at 22, 23 years old, a great, hardworking, great clubhouse presence. I think the older these guys get, the more comfortable they get, the more confident you feel in the guys that you already have in house. And so I don't think it becomes that necessary, that much of a priority to get the best human being, the best clubhouse guy out there on the free agent market. You want the best player. And, you have to trust the group that you've already have in-house with all those guys, that if there are any kind of issues, and over the course of a 6-month season, issues will pop up, losing streaks happen, and maybe there, is a lack of accountability at times, but you trust the veterans that you are growing, like an Adley Rutschman and a Gunnar Henderson, and Cedric Mullins and Austin Hayes, those 2 guys as well. They've built something pretty great here. And so I think Michael Elias can take a step back and say, we're good on clubhouse culture. it's great to have somebody who fits that, but also let's go get somebody who knows how to win games.
Yeah. One point on Gunnar Henderson, just really quickly.
Yeah.
As a 22-year-old rookie, I thought it was very impressive how he stood before his locker and was ready for the media after every single ALDS loss, and really took so much accountability for things when, he's one of the youngest guys in the room, if not the youngest, I think, at the time. He's as much of the face of this franchise as Adley Rutschman is. I think they kind of go hand in hand as the two faces of it. But just, you kind of see the character from a guy like that, and you look at him and you're like, okay, that's what a really great ball player is made of. Not only can he do it on the field, he can also really, he can really handle himself in front of the media. He can take accountability for when he had the base. I guess it was more of a miss hit and run sign from Aaron Hicks, but
he still stood up.
Still stood up and talked about it. So that's a tremendous, encouraging from Gunnar Henderson, that a guy his age, so young, can be that guy already.
Yeah, and this Orioles team will certainly look to acquire veterans who know how to win, who can also lead this group, because I do think, you still can benefit from something like that. We are still taking comments as well on YouTube. Saw a comment about how some trades work, some don't, and that Elias will probably look to trade or at least have conversations about a lot of prospects not named Jackson Holliday. I think that is the one thing we can agree upon.
Yeah, it won't be Jackson. Although, at the trade deadline, a lot of conversations teams started with, if Mike called them, the first player they asked about was Jackson Holliday. That's going to be what teams do, and you're going to have to try to walk them off of that. Some teams were saying, "Oh, Jackson or nothing," and then you hang up the phone and say, "All right, next team."
Yeah.
Because Jackson does seem like a guy who could be the starting second baseman out of spring training. I like Gunnar at short, but he could also, Jackson could be a shortstop too with Gunnar at third. There's a lot of different machinations of how that looks.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not right out of spring training. Maybe it's in May, April, that he ends up coming up. But fairly soon, you feel like he will be part of this setup in Baltimore.
I saw a comment as well about the loss of Brad Seelick and how that might affect the scouting department. He was the Orioles head of draft operations. He actually predated Mike Elias and was in this organization for a while. They were working without a scouting department head for the first couple of years that Mike Elias was in Baltimore. And then, they essentially, Elias was doing everything hands-on when they drafted Adley Rutschman for the first draft that they nailed completely by getting Gunnar Henderson as well in the second round. And then that following winter, after everything was starting to settle, they start to add to that scouting department. And they say, we already have somebody in-house that we like in Brad Seelick. Let's make him the head of draft operations. Brad Seelick did a phenomenal job. I think we can both agree on that, because you look at the last several drafts for the Orioles, they speak for themselves. It's one thing to get a high draft pick and have an opportunity to take a franchise level talent. It's another thing to cash in on those opportunities. They did great work under Matt Blood in developing a lot of these guys, but you have to look at the drafts of Heston Kjerstad, number 2 overall, and say that's a win. Colton Cowser already made his debut with number 5 overall pick. That looks like a win. Jackson Holliday, of course, a home run, number 1 overall. So they did a great job of drafting under Brad Seelick. But the hope is that now, 5 years into Mike Elias's tenure, that they've built a strong enough department to be able to weather the storm and to be able to, suffer the losses that it probably will start with Brad Seelick, and there will be more of guys getting poached from their scouting department. And you hope that you've built enough depth there to be able to weather that.
Yeah, there will be more departures, you have to imagine, with, or at least conversations from other teams. You look at, what the O's have done with a tight budget, turning a franchise around. That is attractive to many teams. And there's a lot of teams with GM openings or managerial openings that I'm sure might call Mike Elias or Brandon Hyde.
Or Sig Mejdal.
Yeah. You figure that all 3 of those will be back next year. In fact, Mike Elias, when asked specifically about it, confirmed that he is back next year. Brandon Hyde is back next year. Beyond that, it's a little bit more cloudy because they have not disclose the exact contract details, the length of it. But from the, at the very least, they're here in 2024. But yeah, I mean, you lose Brad Ciolek. Phenomenal. He did a phenomenal work in Baltimore. There's a reason why, he was one of the few front office types that remained when Mike Elias came, because I think he recognized that Brad was a terrific talent. But he's going to the Washington Nationals. He's going to try to really build their scouting department, because it's been the Nationals have,
they can use them,
underutilized perhaps in that facet. They need to overhaul some things in Washington to make it look a little bit more like Baltimore, perhaps in some of the back end scouting side of things. But yeah, I mean, definitely big loss, but you figure that at this point of this regime, somebody else internally is ready to come up, or there's somebody that Mike knows from either the Cardinals or the Astros or somewhere else that, some other baseball connection that can kind of fill in that role.
Yeah.
But Mike is also very hands-on. So you're not losing somebody that did it all by himself. Right. Basically, there's many people involved in all of these decisions.
And winter meetings are scarily right around the corner, about a month and a half away. That usually is a key time for front office executives to scour the market, not just in terms of players, but also in front offices. And, we could see some more poachings from the Orioles, could see some more conversations as the Orioles try to, if they choose to replace Brad Ciolek in-house, out-of-house.
Yep.
So that'll be interesting to follow as well. Andy, we've talked for over 26 minutes here.
Well, technically 40 if you count the first recording,
the botched recording. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is just the first of what we hope will be many off-season chats as the Orioles embark on what is one of the more important off seasons in the last 5 or 10 years in all of Baltimore. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your comments. We hope that you tune in next week. We're going to shoot to have these every week, Tuesday around 1:00 from the Baltimore Banner offices downtown. And we will keep you apprised. And of course, at AF Kostka on Twitter. Andy is writing great stuff on the BaltimoreBanner.com. Danielle Allentuck, John Mioli, Kyle Goon. We will have you covered.
Paul Mancano.
Thank you very much. At Paul Mancano. Follow me. Follow our at All Banner Sports account as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week.
Thanks, guys.